G'day guys, welcome to a brief video on the TeamMED Philippines trip for 2021-2022 for the end of the year. My name is Charlie Roach. I am a second year medical student and I am the TeamMED Philippines trip coordinator this year. Just before we get started, feel free after this video to find me on Facebook and send me any messages if you've got questions about this Philippines trip, or feel free to email me at that email down the right there. It's just Philippines TeamMED@gmail.com. Cool. So most of you are going to know what TeamMED is, but I just want to include these sort of three main points that talk about TeamMED. Probably know it's a student-run club and society. It's part of the clubs and society at Monash. And we run heaps of events every year, focusing on fundraising, as you can see there, medical resource collection, and we do local volunteering, and then of course our big sort of event or draw card, which are our international trips. Cool. There's lots of more information on the website too, or you can just message any of us if you're interested specifically about TeamMED. Just before we get started on the Philippines, I want to mention that, we know we're in COVID, and whilst you've heard this 50 or 100 times already in the last 12 months, have to make note that the trips this year themselves, the actual international trips, may not be going ahead. It's probably fair to say it's unlikely. But I do want to point out that if you apply and you get in for a trip for this year, you will be preferenced for the applications for next year. So if you get in and the trips don't go ahead, and then you want to apply the year after, you'll have a much greater chance of getting in. Of course, we're still going to pretend the trips are going ahead and we'll prepare for them like they're going ahead until we really know. But pretending they are going ahead, let's talk about Philippines trip. So that picture at the top right is not where we're going. However, it is the Philippines. And as you can see, it's a very beautiful place. This is going to be TeamMED's fourth trip to the Philippines, and it's pretty much split 50-50 between like a clinical component and a direct community component. I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. The trip occurs over the summer holidays, the end of this year, and it's a bit flexible depending on when members are available, what works best. So that'll be up to the team to decide later on. The trip is 2 to 3 weeks total, again, kind of up to the team to flesh that one out a little bit more. But of course, you've got to include preparation time, meetings throughout the year, perhaps monthly, sort of will be decided later on. But most importantly, the fundraising aspect. The fundraising I will talk a bit about at the end of the presentation, so I'll get to that. But that's a really, really important component of being a TeamMED trip member. I'd encourage anyone to apply for the TeamMED Philippines trip. It is really well catered to both pre-clins and clin students. And if you're a pre-clin student like myself, we'll be thrown in the deep end, but it's an awesome learning curve that you come out of thinking, wow, I'm really glad I did that. And if you're a clin student, you get awesome tangible experience of, applying your knowledge, but also learning heaps, because the Philippines has, a lot of challenges that it faces with its healthcare system and sort of its people in general. So the cost of the trip is one of the cheapest TeamMED trips. Costs between $2,000 and $2,500. It's an estimation, but that does include, that estimation, all expenses. So like accommodation, food, travel, as well as some spending money. It's included in the estimation there. That'll be self-funded. Cool. So where are we going? Philippines. If you're not sure where it is, there it is. Manila is the capital of the Philippines, where we'll be flying into, and that's about an 8-hour flight from Melbourne. And if we zoom in a bit, you can see the Philippines is made up of 3 archipelagos. We'll be going to the middle one, the blue one there. It's known as the Visayas. There's actually about 7,500 islands that make up the Philippines, but this is looking at the bigger sort of islands here. They're not obviously representing every single island. So let's zoom in again to look at actually where we're going within the Visayas. So as you can see on the left there, we're going to an island called Samar, and specifically we're going to Northern Samar. Northern Samar is quite geographically isolated, and it is it faces a lot more challenges than you perhaps the capital cities do. It is very rural, and that's one of the awesome things about the trip is we'll get to experience life in a very developing part of the world. So we'll fly from Manila to Kataman, which you can see on the right there, it's the sort of capital of that region. And then we bus to Mondragon, which is where we'll be spending sort of the first half of the trip. Mondragon, you can see, is along that red line, still on the coast there. Cool. So in Mondragon is where we will, not quite Mondragon, but right nearby, is where we'll be spending about half of the trip. And this is sort of the community engagement side of the trip, super important. The place is called Sophies Farm, and it is an organized, it's a farm that was started by the Sacred Heart. And basically it's a program that's just specifically aimed at empowering local people who live near the farm, but also at a local village called Doña Lucia, which is about 10 minutes away. The farm focuses on those 3 points that I've mentioned there. They run all sorts of awesome programs. They do things like farming encouragement programs where they give out seedlings of different animals. They run a women's sewing program. They've also run building projects in the past, especially when there's been natural disasters. And we will be joining them and basically supporting them on their mission for what they do. Some of the things that we will be doing are running health promotion workshops on things like dental hygiene, food hygiene, wound management, hand hygiene. And so kind of things that we take for granted in Australia, and with our knowledge that some of the local people have really never heard about. So it's an awesome chance for us to join into an organization that's already existing, that already works, does some really great work in the community, and we can just help give some of our, I guess you'd call it, expertise as medical students. Awesome. The clinical side is pretty much the other half of the trip, and that is spent at the Northern Samar Provincial Hospital, unless it may be sent to a different hospital, which will kind of just depend on the logistics of the trip, but it'll most likely be here. This is back near Kataman, so not exactly that close to Sophies Farm. Now, this side of the trip is just as amazing, but very different to the sort of community-based side. We will be have some pretty amazing clinical exposure, shadowing ward rounds with local doctors, rotating between different sort of focuses on things like surgery, ED, obs and gyn. And it's a really challenging but rewarding place to see, to visit, to work in, because the Philippines healthcare system kind of experiences like a triple burden. They have a really high rate of communicable diseases, really high rate of non-communicable diseases, and a really high rate of natural disasters. And I guess you could even add on to that the fact that this is an underfunded healthcare system, and especially this provincial hospital. Notable there is the fact that we will take or join the doctors on several of their 24-hour shifts, which is, is a great experience, but it's obviously tiring to say the least. Cool. So goals for the overall trip. Most of them are going to be pretty obvious, but the big one is supporting the development of health equity. So we will do that by obviously, directly trying to provide long-term benefits to the communities that we visit, things like those health promotion workshops. But also even just something as simple as understanding and learning about their healthcare system in that part of the world, and then being able to bring that back and advocate that within our community, and then perhaps allow that to influence the rest of our medical careers. One of the other important things is building long-lasting relationships, and that's why we go back to really similar places and communities so that we can continue upon the work that we've done in past years. Obviously, we will be getting amazing clinical exposure and meeting and making awesome friendships. So just a little note on fundraising. I've had some questions in the past where people kind of assume that the fundraising or think part of it goes to help funding the trip. That's definitely not the case. All of the fundraising goes to the communities we visit. We don't get any of that money. So it is a self-funded trip. And so that's really up to us to fundraise our own ideas and initiatives. And we'll obviously plan and talk about that and hopefully get a lot of it done early on, very like far before we have to start thinking about actually going on the trip. And so, as I've mentioned there, that's going to really be focused on that one of those fundamental purposes of TeamMED, which is the promotion of health equity and advocating for health in general. Awesome, guys. So thanks for listening to the presentation. Hopefully you've learned a little bit more about the TeamMED Philippines trip. Note that the applications for all the trips open on 1st of April, close on the 15th of April. So 2 good weeks. Watch our Facebook page for sort of notices on those applications. And also, I'd really encourage everyone to register to be a 2021 TeamMED Club member. That's just through the Monash Clubs and Societies. Final thing there is the Zoom launch night on the 26th of March. So if you guys have questions to any of the TeamMED trip coordinators, but also other committee members, come along to that. Hope to see you there and you can ask some different questions. Awesome. Hopefully I'll be seeing some of you guys soon and super keen to be the trip coordinator for this upcoming year. Thanks.